Dr. Alistair Finch was a man whose hands could work wonders, but whose heart had turned to stone. As the world's most famous veterinarian, he believed only in cold, hard science. So when a little girl named Lily brought in her paralyzed dog, he delivered his verdict without a hint of emotion. There is no hope. This dog will never walk again. But while the adults prepared for the worst, the little girl simply knelt down and began to sing a quiet, ancient melody. Dr. Finch scoffed at the display until the impossible happened before his very eyes, and the entire room fell into a stunned, supernatural silence. This is just the tip of the iceberg. To find out how this impossible story ends, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what happens next. The Finch Veterinary Institute was less a clinic and more a palace of glass and steel. It smelled of antiseptic and money, a place where the pets of the wealthy received care better than most. Humans. At its center sat Dr. Alistair Finch, a king on a broken throne. His fame was built on surgical miracles, but his heart was a fortress, locked tight since the day his own dog, Apollo, had died in his arms, defying all of his science. Before him, on a cold steel table, lay a scruffy mutt named Buddy, and next to the dog stood his owner, a 7-year-old girl named Lily, whose worn-out sneakers seemed to profane the clinic's polished floors. Dr. Finch ignored them both, his eyes fixed on the glowing X-ray displayed on a large screen. The image was brutally clear. He finally turned, his face a mask of detached authority. "The spinal cord is catastrophically damaged," he announced, his voice leaving no room for argument. "There is zero neural activity. There will be no recovery." He let the words hang in the sterile air, a death sentence delivered with the indifference of a man signing a purchase order. "The most humane, the most logical course of action," he continued, "is euthanasia. We can do it now. He will feel no pain." Lily did not cry. She simply reached out her small hand, stroking Buddy's head. He remained motionless, a furry statue of brokenness. The great Dr. Finch expected tears, pleading, the usual messy emotions he despised. Instead, the little girl looked up, her gaze cutting through his armor of indifference. "He doesn't need to sleep forever," she whispered, her voice impossibly calm. "He just needs me to sing for him. Then he'll be okay." Statement so simple, so absurd, hung in the sterile air of the examination room. For a moment, Dr. Alistair Finch was certain he had misheard. He, the man whose papers were published in the world's most prestigious medical journals, whose name was synonymous with veterinary excellence, was being told that the solution to a severed spinal cord was a little girl's song. A flicker of something dark and cold ignited in his chest. It was the same feeling of impotent rage he'd felt years ago, standing over Apollo's lifeless body, the feeling of logic and science being mocked by a cruel, indifferent universe. He drew in a slow, controlled breath, the mask of professionalism slipping perfectly back into place. His gaze swept over to his intern, a young, bright-eyed Dr. Evans who was watching the scene with an uncomfortable pity. He also noted Nurse Gable, a woman who had worked with him for 15 years, already preparing a syringe with a clear liquid, her expression one of tired resignation. They were his audience. This was his stage. It was time for a lesson in reality. "Sing for him," Dr. Finch repeated, letting a dry, humorless chuckle escape his lips. The sound was like stones grinding together. "My dear child," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "this is a place of medicine. We deal in facts, in physiology, in the tangible reality of the body. We do not deal in lullabies." He deliberately used the most belittling word he could think of. He wanted to crush this foolish hope before it could fester. It was, in his mind, a form of kindness, a surgical removal of a dangerous fantasy. He turned his body slightly, addressing his intern but ensuring Lily could hear every word. "Dr. Evans, observe. This is the most difficult part of our job, the denial phase. An owner's grief can manifest as an unwillingness to accept the facts. It is our duty, our solemn responsibility, to guide them to the truth, no matter how painful. False hope is the cruelest poison of all." He was performing, using the girl's grief as a teaching moment. He wanted to see her cry, to break down, to finally accept his verdict so they could proceed. But Lily did not cry. She didn't even seem to be listening. Her entire world had shrunk to the motionless form of her dog on the table. She ignored the king in his castle. the celebrated doctor, the quiet hum of a dozen machines worth more than her family's home. With a grace that seemed entirely out of place, she knelt down on the cold, polished floor. Her knees must have ached on the hard surface, but she didn't flinch. She leaned in close to Buddy's head, her small forehead almost touching his. And then she began to sing. It wasn't a song for an audience. It was a thread of sound, a melody so soft it was almost a hum. There were no discernible words, just a simple, ancient tune that rose and fell like a gentle tide. It was a sound of pure, undiluted love, an acoustic anomaly in a room built on sterility and silence. Nurse Gable paused, the syringe in her hand, and shot Dr. Finch an irritated look, as if to say, Dr. Evans stood frozen, his clinical detachment warring with a raw human empathy. Dr. Finch felt a vein begin to throb in his temple. This was a circus. His perfectly controlled, logical sanctuary had been invaded by sentimentality. He took a step forward, his mouth opening to issue a sharp, final command. He would have security escort her out if necessary. This farce was over. And then it happened. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't a grand gesture. It was a single tiny movement. From the base of Buddy's spine, a flicker of life. His tail, which had lain limp and dead as a piece of rope, lifted a fraction of an inch from the cold steel, and then, with a soft but distinct "ee," it struck the table. The song hitched in Lily's throat. Dr. Evans gasped, a sharp intake of breath that was unnaturally loud in the suddenly silent room. Nurse Gable's eyes widened. Her professional cynicism vanishing in an instant. She took an involuntary step backward, as if she had just witnessed an act of sacrilege. Dr. Finch stood completely still, the command he was about to give dying on his lips. His mind, a finely tuned machine of logic and reason, sputtered to a halt. It was impossible. He had seen the X-ray. He knew the anatomy. A severed cord could not transmit a signal. It was a spasm, a post-mortem reflex, a trick of the light. He mentally cycled through a dozen rational explanations, but his own eyes betrayed him. As if to mock his frantic search for logic, it happened again. Another, slower this time, weaker, but it was undeniably there. A deliberate movement. An answer. The soft humming had stopped. The only sound in the multi-million-dollar clinic was the frantic, panicked beating of Dr. Alistair Finch's own heart. He stared at the dog, then at the girl, and for the first time in 15 years, the king felt the foundations of his castle begin to crumble. The whisper of a miracle had spoken, and his entire world of facts had no reply. For a long moment, the world stood still. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the flicker of life in Buddy's tail was gone. The dog was once again a still, broken form on the steel table. The brief, impossible magic had vanished, leaving behind a silence more profound and unsettling than before. Dr. Alistair Finch's mind, a precision instrument trained for decades, snapped back into action. The shock receded, replaced by a desperate need to reclaim the narrative, to restore order from the chaos that had just breached his walls. He was the expert. He was the voice of reason. He would not allow this anomaly to stand unexplained. A sacral reflex arc, he said, his voice loud and forceful, shattering the fragile silence. He wasn't just speaking to his staff. He was trying to convince himself. An involuntary nerve response triggered by the girl's touch. A final, residual spasm from the damaged nerves. It's not uncommon in cases of severe spinal trauma. It means nothing. He spewed the medical jargon like a shield, each syllable a brick being hastily placed back into the wall around his certainty. He refused to look at Lily, who was now quietly stroking Buddy's head, seemingly unfazed as if she expected this. He turned to Nurse Gable, his tone sharp. Prepare the paperwork. No charge for this consultation. Waiving the fee was not an act of charity. It was a desperate attempt to sever all ties to this event, to push it away from his pristine, orderly world. He then addressed Lily's mother, a tired-looking woman who had been waiting by the door, her face a mixture of hope and fear after hearing the gasp from inside. I must be perfectly clear, Finch said, his professionalism now feeling like a brittle costume. The prognosis has not changed. What you witnessed was a biological fluke. To interpret it as anything more would be a grave mistake. It is an illusion, and I Strongly advise you against clinging to it. He managed them out of his clinic with a cold efficiency, the little girl with her impossible song and the broken dog that had, for 2 seconds, defied the laws of medicine. As the glass doors slid shut behind them, Dr. Finch felt a wave of relief so intense it left him lightheaded. The contamination had been removed, but it was too late. The clinic no longer felt the same. The quiet hum of the air filtration system seemed to mock him. Every reflection in the polished chrome seemed to hold a question in its depths. He proceeded with his next appointment, a Persian cat with a minor skin allergy belonging to a famous actress, but his mind was elsewhere. The actress's vapid chatter about her cat's emotional distress grated on his nerves more than usual. All he could hear was the soft of a tail on a steel table. All he could see were Lily's clear, knowing eyes. He cancelled the rest of his appointments for the day, claiming a sudden migraine. In reality, his mind was a storm of conflict. He retreated to his office, a sanctuary of leather-bound books and scientific awards, and locked the door. He needed evidence. He needed to debunk what his own senses had told him. He pulled up the security footage from the examination room. There they were, digital ghosts on a high-definition screen. He watched himself deliver the diagnosis, his body language arrogant and dismissive. He saw the girl kneel. He saw the song, though he could not hear it. And then he saw the tale. He zoomed in, his face inches from the screen. He played it back, frame by frame. It was there, undeniable, unedited, a recorded fact that had no scientific explanation. The footage, which should have been his tool for rational debunking, became his tormentor. That night, sleep offered no escape. He went home to his sprawling, minimalist house, a place as empty and silent as his own life had become. He poured a glass of expensive whiskey, but the taste brought him no comfort. Every shadow in the house seemed to dance with doubt. He found himself thinking of Apollo, of the helplessness he had felt, the rage at the limits of his own knowledge. He had built an empire of certainty on the ashes of that one failure. And now a 7-year-old girl and a stray dog had threatened to burn that empire to the ground. Was he going mad? Was stress causing him to hallucinate? Or had he, Dr. Alistair Finch, the man of science, witnessed a miracle? The thought was so repulsive, so alien to his entire being, that it made him physically ill. He paced the cold floors of his home, a prisoner in his own mind. The desert of doubt was vast and terrifying, and his trusted map of science was now useless. By dawn, drenched in sweat and shaking with a mixture of fear and adrenaline, he came to a single terrifying conclusion. He could not analyze this event from a distance. He could not dismiss it. He had to understand it. And there was only one person who held the key. He had to find the girl. He had to see it happen again, or expose the trick, or prove himself sane. His frantic, obsessive search had begun. Dr. Finch began his search with the clinical detachment of a scientist tracking a specimen. He told himself this was a professional follow-up, a necessary step to understand the anomalous neurological event. He retrieved Lily's file from his clinic's records, a file he had barely glanced at before. The address listed was in the city's industrial outskirts, a part of town he only ever saw from the windows of a private jet. The next morning, he found himself driving his immaculate German sedan through streets that grew progressively narrower and more neglected. Paved avenues gave way to cracked asphalt, and then to dirt. The gleaming towers of the city center were replaced by a skyline of smokestacks and dilapidated warehouses. He, in his $1,000 suit, was an alien in this world. This was more than a drive across town. It was a descent into a reality he had spent his entire life successfully ignoring. He found Lily's home, a small, weary-looking house at the end of a row of identical structures. Her mother answered the door, her face etched with surprise and suspicion. Finch put on his most professional demeanor, explaining he needed more information about the accident for his research. To understand the dog's condition fully, he lied, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. The story was simple and tragic. It had been late. Buddy had gotten out of the yard. The mother had heard the screech of tires and a terrible yelp. By the time she got outside, the dog was lying on the side of the road, and the vehicle was gone. What kind of vehicle was it? Finch pressed. The mother shook her head. It was dark. All I saw was that it was a white van. No markings, no logos. It just disappeared. A white, unmarked van. It was a dead end. Frustration gnawed at him. He left the house feeling more lost than before. His quest for a scientific answer had stalled, but the obsession, the image of the thumping tail, would not let him rest. For a man like Alistair Finch, a dead end was not an obstacle. It was a challenge to his power. If the world wouldn't give him an answer, he would force it to. Back in the sterile comfort of his office, he channeled his manic energy into a new direction. He wasn't just a vet, he was a wealthy, influential man. He hired a private investigator, a discreet professional who specialized in finding things that didn't want to be found. The instructions were simple: find every piece of traffic and security camera footage from a 10-block radius of Lily's Street on the night of the accident. Within hours, gigabytes of data were flowing into Finch's encrypted server. He locked his office door, shut the blinds, and for the next day and a half, he lived in a world of grainy, time-stamped images. He watched the digital life of the neighborhood unfold. People walking home from late shifts, stray cats slinking through alleys, the rhythmic pulse of traffic lights painting empty streets. His eyes burned from staring at the screen, his body thrumming with caffeine and a singular, obsessive purpose. And then, he found it. At 11:47 p.m., on a camera mounted to a liquor store 2 blocks from Lily's house, a white van came speeding through an intersection, its headlights cutting through the darkness. It was moving too fast, recklessly. Finch's heart began to hammer against his ribs. He isolated the footage, running it through enhancement software, fighting against the digital noise and motion blur. He zoomed in on the side of the van. The image was distorted, but there was something there. A small logo. He applied another filter, sharpening the pixels one by one. Slowly, an image began to emerge from the digital static. It was a stylized bird in flight, encircled by 2 words. As the words sharpened, the blood in Finch's veins turned to Ice Bioserve Logistics. He didn't need to look it up, he knew the name. A cold dread, heavy and suffocating, washed over him. With trembling hands, he opened his laptop and navigated to the secure server for Finch Labs, his highly profitable and morally ambiguous research division. He went into the accounting archives, his fingers flying across the keyboard, typing in the contractor's name. A single file appeared on the screen. A service contract signed by him 6 months prior. He clicked it. Open, his mind screaming at him to stop. There, in cold black and white print, was the truth. Bioserve Logistics was a third-party waste disposal service. The contract was for the discreet and cost-effective removal of biohazardous materials. He remembered the meeting. He had boasted to his board about cutting operational costs by 20%. Bioserve was the cheapest option. He had signed the papers without a second thought, never asking what cost-effective truly meant. The full, horrifying reality crashed down upon him. The van wasn't just in the neighborhood by chance, it was there for him. It was his van, his waste, his sin. The illegal dumping to cut costs, the reckless driver speeding away from a community he deemed worthless, the hit and run that had shattered a little girl's world. It all led back to his signature on a piece of paper. He hadn't just diagnosed Buddy's paralysis. He had paid for it. He leaned back in his chair, the glow of the monitor illuminating. A face stripped bare of its arrogance. The man staring back at his reflection on the dark screen was not a brilliant scientist or a powerful CEO. He was a criminal. The suffering he had witnessed, the miracle that had confounded him, it was all a message from a universe that had finally decided to show him the monster in his own mirror. The glow from the monitor was a merciless spotlight, pinning Dr. Finch to his chair. The contract on the screen was no longer just a document. It was a confession, written in cold corporate language and signed with his own hand. For hours he did not move. The silence in his opulent office, once a symbol of his power and solitude, now felt like the inside of a tomb. A wave of nausea rolled through him as the pieces of his life rearranged themselves into a new monstrous picture. Every award on his wall seemed to mock him. Every textbook he'd authored felt like a work of fiction. The man he thought he was, brilliant, rational, successful, was a carefully constructed lie. The truth was the man on the screen, a man who traded the safety of a community for a few percentage points on a profit margin. Guilt was a physical force. It pressed down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. He felt a desperate, primal urge to do something, to act, to escape the crushing weight of his own reflection. His mind, stripped of its scientific arrogance, could only focus on one thing. He had to go back. The second drive to Lily's neighborhood was a pilgrimage through his own personal hell. Every pothole his expensive car jolted over felt like a judgment. Every run-down house seemed to stare at him with accusing windows. He saw the stray animals, the neglected gardens, the children playing in the shadow of the smokestacks. And for the first time, he didn't see urban decay. He saw a landscape he had personally poisoned. The air itself felt thick with his negligence. He was not an observer in this world. He was its villain. He parked his car down the street, unable to pull up directly in front of the house. He walked the final 100 feet, the fine leather of his shoes scuffing on the broken pavement. He felt like an intruder, a trespasser on holy ground. When he knocked on the door, his hand was trembling. Lily's mother opened it, and this time her suspicion was replaced by a look of deep concern. The man on her doorstep was not the same man who had visited before. The mask of cold authority was gone, shattered. In its place was the face of a man drowning in a sea of unspoken sorrow. He looked haunted, broken. Before she could speak, one of his old instincts kicked in, the instinct to solve a problem by throwing money at it. It was the only tool he had left. "Please," he began, his voice raspy, unfamiliar to his own ears. He fumbled inside his jacket and pulled out a checkbook and a pen. I want to help. With Buddy, I want to set up a trust for his lifetime care. Any specialist, any treatment, anywhere in the world. Name a number, any number. It doesn't matter." He was babbling, the words spilling out in a desperate torrent. He was trying to turn this moral abyss into a transaction, to reduce his soul-crushing guilt to a simple matter of dollars and cents. He scribbled frantically, ready to sign away a fortune to silence the screaming in his own head. He offered the checkbook to Lily's mother, but a small hand intercepted it. Lily had stepped forward from the shadows of the hallway. She didn't take the check. She simply placed her tiny hand over his, stopping the movement of the pen. She looked at the checkbook, then up at the face of the powerful man who was crumbling before her. There was no anger in her eyes. There was no accusation. There was only a profound, heartbreaking clarity. "He doesn't need your money," she said, her voice as soft and steady as it had been in the clinic. Her words hung in the air, and in that moment, the entire world shifted on its axis. He was the millionaire, the genius, the man with all the power. She was a poor 7-year-old girl, but her simple refusal of his money was a judgment that stripped him of all his worldly authority. His wealth was meaningless here. She wasn't finished. "The hurt needs to stop," she continued, her gaze unwavering. "Not just for Buddy. The flowers in the yard get sick. The birds don't sing here anymore." She spoke a simple truth that his own scientists and environmental impact reports had been paid to ignore. She saw the poison he had tried so hard to keep invisible. Then she looked directly into his soul and delivered the final diagnosis. "Buddy needs you to fix what's broken," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He needs you to fix it inside of you." The words struck him with the force of a physical blow. He stumbled back a step, the checkbook falling from his numb fingers. He, the great doctor, was the one who was sick. His soul was riddled with a cancer of greed and indifference. And this child, this innocent victim of his corruption, had just diagnosed it with perfect, terrifying precision. He was the patient. She was the healer. The power had not just been inverted, it had been annihilated. He turned and walked away, unable to speak, unable to even breathe. He left the checkbook lying on the dusty porch. He was no longer a man searching for an explanation for a miracle. He was a guilty soul who had just been told the impossible price of his own redemption. Dr. Finch drove away from Lily's house in a fugue state. The world outside his car window was a blur of muted colors and indistinct shapes. The only thing clear in his mind were the child's words, echoing like a mantra. The phrase was a key, unlocking rooms in his soul he had kept sealed for decades. He saw his ambition, his relentless drive for perfection, was not a quest for knowledge, but a desperate flight from the memory of his own failure with Apollo. He saw his wealth not as a measure of success, but as the material used to build the walls of his emotional fortress. He was a man who had gained the whole world, only to find himself utterly bankrupt. He didn't know how long he drove, but he ended up parked by a desolate stretch of the industrial canal, the water below murky and lifeless. He was at the bottom, stripped of his pride, his certainty, and his identity. He was nothing but the sum of his worst decisions. It was in this moment of absolute surrender that his phone began to vibrate, its shrill cry a violent intrusion into his silent confession. It was Marcus, his chief legal counsel. His voice was tight, panicked. "Alistair, we have a 5-alarm fire. Just called. They have a source, an insider. They have documents, shipping manifests from BioServe, internal memos about cost-cutting in the lab's waste management. Alistair, they have everything. They're running a front-page story in 48 hours. We have to respond." A year ago, even a week ago, this news would have sent a jolt of adrenaline and fury through him. He would have relished the fight, the strategic warfare of corporate litigation. But now, the news landed with a dull, hollow thud. It wasn't a threat. It felt like an inevitability, like a consequence that had finally arrived to collect its due. "Get the team," Finch said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. Boardroom. 1 hour. An hour later, Dr. Finch sat at the head of a massive mahogany table in the Finch Lab's boardroom. The room, on the top floor of his corporate headquarters, had a panoramic view of the city, the view from Olympus. Around him sat his crisis team, 4 ruthless lawyers and 2 PR sharks, all of them the best money could buy. They were predators, loyal to his checkbook, and they were ready to be unleashed. Marcus laid out the strategy. It was a brutal, efficient plan designed to crush the opposition. First, we issue an unequivocal denial. We brand the story as baseless, malicious, a work of fiction by a struggling publication desperate for clicks. He began, pacing the room. Second, we identify and discredit the source. We'll find them and we'll ruin them. Non-disclosure agreements, professional blacklisting, they'll never work in this industry again. Another lawyer chimed in. Third, and most importantly, we attack the newspaper. I'm already drafting a $500 million defamation lawsuit. We'll bury them in legal fees. By the time this is over, we'll be bankrupt. It will serve as a warning to anyone else who ever thinks of coming after us. They spoke of destruction and ruin with the casual air of ordering lunch. As they laid out their plans of denial and intimidation, Finch was silent. He heard their words, but his mind was somewhere else. He was standing on a dusty porch looking into the eyes of a 7-year-old girl. He saw the sick flowers in her yard. He saw the quiet dignity with which she rejected his tainted money. The strategies his team proposed, the lies, the threats, the concealment, were the very architecture of the brokenness inside him. This was the system that produced the unmarked white van. This was the machine that created the poison. To unleash these lawyers would be to double down on his sickness. It would be a declaration of war against the last shred of his own humanity. Saving his empire this way would mean the final damnation of his soul. Marcus stopped pacing and looked at him, a confident smirk on his face. The battle plan was laid out. All it needed was the general's command. "Alistair, we're ready. Just give us the word and we will burn them to the ground for you." All eyes in the room turned to him. The air was thick with anticipation. This was the moment. The choice between 2 destructions. He could destroy the newspaper and save his fortune, or he could save his soul and let his empire burn. He looked at the faces of his lawyers, men who mirrored the man he used to be, and he felt a wave of revulsion. He saw the sickness, clear as day. He took a deep breath, the first clean breath he felt he had taken in 20 years. He stood up, and the room fell silent. "There will be no lawsuit," he said, his voice calm and steady. The lawyers exchanged confused glances. "There will be no denial, and you will not harm the source." Marcus stepped forward. "Alistair, what are you talking about? This is professional suicide." "Perhaps," Finch replied, a strange sense of peace settling over him. "Or perhaps it's, the opposite." He walked to the window, looking down at the city he had once sought to conquer. It all seemed so small now. He turned back to his stunned team. "I want you to call the lead reporter on this story. Her name is Sarah Jennings. I want you to tell her that I will not be issuing a comment." He paused, letting the weight of his next words fill the room. "Tell her I'm giving her an exclusive, in-person interview, and I'm bringing all the documents she doesn't have. Tell her I am going to confess." Sarah Jennings was a wolf. For 25 years as an investigative journalist, she had hunted corporate criminals, corrupt politicians, and every flavor of powerful man who believed himself to be above the law. When she received the call from Alistair Finch's legal team offering an exclusive interview, She sharpened her teeth. She knew the game. It would be a performance of feigned transparency, a carefully worded non-apology designed to get ahead of the story. She walked into the designated room, a stark, neutral meeting space Finch had rented, with her armor on, her questions loaded like bullets in a magazine. She was not prepared for the man who stood to greet her. This was not the arrogant, godlike figure from the covers of veterinary magazines. The man before her was stripped of all pretense. He was quiet, his eyes holding a profound weariness, yet also a strange, unsettling peace. He was alone. No lawyers, no handlers. Just him, a table, 2 chairs, and a stack of manila folders. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Jennings," he said, his voice steady. "There will be no tricks, no off-the-record comments. Everything I'm about to say, you can print." Sarah sat, her journalistic instincts buzzing with confusion. She started with a sharp, probing question about the whistleblower's documents. "Dr. Finch, our evidence suggests your laboratory knowingly hired a contractor with a history of environmental violations to cut costs. How do you respond to that?" "Accusation?" Finch did not flinch. He pushed one of the folders across the table. "I respond by confirming it. That is a copy of the contract, which I signed. And here," he pushed another folder, "are the internal profit and loss projections I used to justify that decision. The accusation is not only true, it's incomplete. The negligence was entirely my own." Sarah was stunned into silence. In her entire career, no one had ever simply confessed. They dodged, they deflected, they lied. Finch was doing the opposite. He was guiding her through his own crimes. For the next hour, he dismantled his own life, piece by piece, with a calm, surgical precision. He spoke of the pressure for profits, the moral compromises that started small and grew into monsters, the willful ignorance he had cultivated to protect his conscience. Then, his voice softened. "But this isn't just a story about corporate malfeasance. That's the symptom. The disease is personal." And he told her everything. He told her about a little girl named Lily and her dog Buddy. He described the cold, sterile examination room, his own condescending words, the moment he had dismissed her faith as childish nonsense. His voice cracked for the first time as he described the impossible thing he had witnessed, the gentle thump of a broken dog's tail. "I went looking for a scientific explanation," he told her, his eyes looking not at her, but through her, into his own recent past. "I was so arrogant. I thought the universe owed me an answer that fit inside my textbooks. Instead, it gave me a mirror. I discovered that the van that crippled this little girl's dog was there because of me. The poison my lab was creating in pursuit of profit was being secretly dumped in her neighborhood, the one I paid to ignore." He leaned forward, his hands flat on the table, a man laid bare. "You came here to expose a corrupt CEO, Ms. Jennings. But the real story is about a man who became a monster without even noticing. A man who had to have his entire world shattered by a 7-year-old girl before he could see what he had become. The confession was absolute, but it was not the end. The sacrifice was yet to come." "So what now?" Sarah asked, her voice hushed, the wolf inside her now a silent, awestruck witness. "Now the atonement begins," Finch said, effective immediately. "Finch Labs is permanently closed. I am turning over all my research and assets to an independent oversight committee. I will cooperate fully with the authorities, and I will plead guilty to every applicable charge. I expect to go to prison, and I will." He took a deep breath, the final liberating step into the abyss. "Furthermore, I am liquidating my entire personal fortune. Every stock, every property, every dollar in every account. It will be used to create a new foundation. Its first task will be to fund a complete environmental cleanup and health monitoring program for the community my company poisoned. Its second task will be to build a sanctuary in that neighborhood, a place for abandoned and abused animals. It will offer free veterinary care to those who cannot afford it. It will be a place of healing." He looked up, a flicker of moisture in his eyes. "It will be called the Apollo Sanctuary." The interview was over. Sarah Jennings sat back, the story of a lifetime in her notebook, but the headline had changed. This wasn't just a takedown. It was a story of ruin, but also of a strange and powerful redemption. Alistair Finch stood up and walked to the window. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. He was a man who had nothing left. His company was gone. His fortune was gone. His reputation was about to be incinerated. He had willingly sacrificed everything he had ever built on the altar of his own guilt, and as he watched the last sliver of sun dip below the horizon, a profound sense of peace washed over him. The weight was gone. The fortress had fallen. He was finally, terrifyingly free. The 48 hours between the confession and the story's publication were the quietest of Alistair Finch's life. He did not go home to his cavernous, empty house. He stayed in his now foreign office, methodically executing the promises he had made. With a small team of astonished but obedient lawyers, he signed the documents that dissolved his corporate empire. He transferred the entirety of his personal fortune, a staggering sum that had once defined him, into the escrow account for the new foundation. Each stroke of the pen felt less like a loss and more like a liberation, a severing of the chains that had bound him to the man in the mirror. He was a ghost in his own life, dismantling the monument he had built to his own ego, and a strange sense of calm settled over him. The storm was coming, but he was for the first time at peace in its eye. On the morning of the second day, it broke. At precisely 6 a.m., published Sarah Jennings' article, online. The headline was a digital thunderclap. The story spread like wildfire. It was the lead item on every news channel, a viral tsunami on social media. The public reaction was a maelstrom of shock and disbelief. Some called it a hoax. Others, the more cynical, saw it as a calculated PR stunt, a ploy to avoid harsher legal penalties. But for those who read the full, unflinching transcript of his confession, his raw accounting of his own greed, and the story of the little girl who had shattered his world, there was a sense of profound, unsettling awe. The world didn't know what to make of a man who willingly chose his own destruction. But miles away from the digital storm, in the quiet, forgotten corner of the city that Finch's crimes had scarred, there was no awareness of the news. In Lily's small living room, the only sound was the gentle, rhythmic hum of an old refrigerator and the soft whisper of a child's song. Buddy lay on a soft blanket near the window, his body as still as it had been for weeks. He was clean and fed, cared for with a love that defied his hopeless diagnosis. Lily sat on the floor beside him as she had every day. For her, nothing had changed. The doctor's verdict, the world's logic, none of it mattered. All that mattered was the steady, hopeful beating of her own heart. She leaned in, her small hand resting gently on Buddy's head, and began to sing. It was the same ancient, wordless melody, a tune that felt as if it were woven from sunlight and memory. It was a prayer made of breath and love. At the exact moment that news anchors across the country were reading Finch's confession aloud, Buddy's ear twitched. It was a small, barely perceptible movement, but Lily felt it. Her song did not falter. Her voice remained steady, a lifeline of pure faith. As the world learned the details of the newly created Apollo sanctuary, Buddy's eyes, once dull and clouded with pain, slowly opened. They focused on Lily's face with a clarity that had been absent since the accident. A low, soft whine escaped his throat. Online, the first legal documents confirming the transfer of Finch's assets went public, silencing the cynics. He had actually done it. He had given it all away. At that precise moment, Buddy lifted his head from the blanket. His front paws scrabbled for purchase on the worn wooden floor, his muscles trembling with exertion. The final act of sacrifice was Finch's public statement, released through the newspaper in which he took full sole responsibility, officially resigning from a world that had once worshipped him. As his public life was declared over, a new life was beginning. With a surge of effort that seemed to draw on the very energy of Lily's song, Buddy pushed. His back legs, limp and useless for so long, convulsed. He whimpered, a sharp cry of effort and pain, but he did not stop. Lily's voice grew a fraction stronger, pouring hope and strength into him. He pushed again, his entire body, shaking until miraculously, impossibly, he was up. He stood on 4 trembling, unsteady legs, a living monument to a faith that had refused to surrender. Lily's song finally trailed off into a choked sob of pure joy. She didn't rush to him. She simply opened her arms. Buddy took one clumsy, faltering step, then another. Then he was half walking, half falling into her embrace, burying his head in her shoulder, his tail now wagging with a wild, unrestrained joy. The healing of the soul had manifested in the healing of the body. The sacrifice, given freely and without expectation, had been answered by an act of impossible grace. In the quiet of a small living room, a world away from the noise and the fury, the miracle was complete. 1 year later, the name Alistair Finch was a ghost, a half-forgotten headline from last year's news cycle. The man himself had vanished from the world of wealth and fame he once dominated. In his place stood a sprawling green sanctuary, nestled in the very neighborhood his company had once poisoned. The air here no longer carried the scent of industry and neglect, but the sweet smell of fresh hay, clean earth, and the gentle, chaotic sounds of life being lived. A simple wooden sign at the entrance read, "The Apollo Sanctuary," and here amidst the barking, purring and chirping was a new Alistair Finch. The expensive suits were gone, replaced by simple work pants and a faded blue shirt, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. The cold, impenetrable mask had melted away, leaving behind a face softened by the sun and etched with the lines of genuine smiles. He was thinner, weathered, but his eyes held a light and a clarity that $1 billion had never been able to buy. He was kneeling in the dirt, his hands, once famous for performing impossibly delicate surgeries, now gently cleaning the wounded paw of a terrified three-legged dog. The animal, a rescue from a dogfighting ring, flinched and snarled, its fear a wall of aggression. The old Dr. Finch would have ordered sedation, handling the problem with efficient, detached force. This new man simply waited. He hummed a soft, tuneless melody, his voice calm and patient, until the dog's snarling subsided into a low whimper, and it finally licked his hand. He was no longer just a veterinarian, he was a healer of a different kind, mending the wounds that science couldn't see. A joyous, frantic barking broke his concentration. A golden-brown blur of fur came, bounding across the field, chasing a bright red ball. It was Buddy, his movements fluid and powerful, not a trace of his past paralysis remaining. He was a living, breathing testament to the impossible. Following him was Lily, now 8 years old, her face bright with laughter. They were not visitors here, they were a part of the sanctuary's soul, volunteering every weekend. "He's getting faster, Dr. Finch," Lily called out, her voice full of pride. "It seems we'll have to build him a racetrack." "Soon," Alistair replied, his smile effortless. He no longer corrected her when she called him doctor. He knew now that the title was not about status, but about service. Later, as the afternoon sun began to dip towards the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields, Alistair and Lily sat on a wooden bench overlooking a pond. Buddy was asleep at their feet, his head resting on Alistair's boot. For a long while they sat in a comfortable silence, watching the rescued animals roam in the peaceful twilight. "Do you ever miss it?" Lily asked, her small voice cutting gently through the quiet. "The big buildings, the fancy machines." Alistair looked out at the sanctuary he had built from the ashes of his old life. He thought of the court battles, the public disgrace, and the community service that had replaced a prison sentence due to his unprecedented cooperation and restitution. He had lost everything the world deemed valuable. "I thought I would," he said, his voice thick with a quiet sincerity. "But I discovered that all my money ever did was build taller walls. I spent my whole life trying to keep the world out, but all I did was trap myself inside. I'm not a prisoner anymore." He looked down at the sleeping dog, then at the girl beside him. "You saved me, you know that, right, Lily?" She shook her head, her wisdom still as simple and profound as it had been a year ago. "I didn't do anything," she said. "Buddy did, and so did you." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "You didn't need me to sing for you, Dr. Finch. You just had to learn to listen to your own heart singing." Alistair felt a warmth spread through his chest, a feeling of wholeness he had never known. He was not a king, a genius, or a tycoon. He was just a man sitting on a bench next to a friend with a dog at his feet, in a place of peace he had helped create. The sacrifice had been absolute, the price impossibly high. But the reward, this quiet, unassuming, breathtaking peace, was infinitely greater. This was his new beginning. This was his dawn. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to see more moving videos like this one. Leave a like to support us, and turn on notifications so you don't miss a thing. This helps us continue to create the best for you. Until the next video.